Well, Esper the Bard, you made a big dragon video, but didn't include us kobolds in it.
Well, kobolds. Your creature type is humanoid.
So is Dragonborn, and you didn't leave them out?
But they're obviously so draconic.
And we're not? Us kobolds were dragonkin before the Dragonborn were even a toot in Mike Merrill's office chair.
I don't think he was even involved in the original Races of the Dragon book.
But we are dragons.
Are you really?
Yes, of course.
So then you aren't gonna mind if I take a deep dive into the pages of Dungeons & Dragons lore. The Kobold is one of the most prominent monsters of low-level play in D&D. And when I say low-level, I mean first-level characters often fight kobolds. Not that mid or high-level characters never ever do, but it's much less common to encounter them in adventures the higher the level. Kobolds are a time-honored monster in D&D, even endearing to some people because, well, I guess because they're small, scrawny, yippy little buggers that get bullied around. It's sort of like how some people have a soft spot for goblins. Kobolds are crafty things, lovers of tunnels and traps, and they are quite organized and methodical in their behavior. They're often associated with dragons, working as minions or slaves or even worshippers. And a passing glance at the artwork certainly gives us a draconic aesthetic. But what are kobolds, really? And do they have cool enough abilities and storylines to warrant all the seeming affection that they receive from D&D gamers? In this video, I'll rate the kobolds like you see me do with the other monster types, and since I'm focusing exclusively on them, we're going to get a bit of an in-depth look. So, as I'm fond of doing, let's start with the mythological origin of this creature and see what we find. The kobold comes from Germanic mythology, which, along with the related Norse mythology, gives us creatures such as dwarves, elves, and giants. The original description of a kobold is a sprite, so a little spirit. You could say it's a fairy spirit if you want. Kobolds didn't have one set appearance, as they could take the shape of an animal, or a flame, or a tiny humanoid. And they could just as easily be invisible. They lived in homes, underground, in mines, sometimes aboard ships. Like goblins, they were known as mischievous things. They were pranksters, though in some circumstances they would assist with the household tasks and other types of chores. Some historians believe that the Germanic kobold actually traces back to classical antiquity. Ancient Greece had the kobalos, which is essentially the same creature. It's a little sprite who's roguish and a shameless trickster, but its antics may be considered amusing. It's possible that this concept spread across Europe during the Middle Ages and evolved into things like kobold, goblin, boggart, boggle, puck. I've searched and searched for texts containing original myths of the kobalos, including one in which they supposedly rob Hercules. But these texts have proven highly elusive and difficult to find, so let's jump back to the Germanic kobold. It looks like the kobolds were categorized into three types: wood kobolds, cave kobolds, and sea kobolds. The wood or forest kobolds were often solitary household spirits. People were known to invite them in or to give them little gifts in exchange for their help, or at least to keep them pleased. The cave or subterranean kobolds lived in groups or communities of their own, but they came across the humans who were mining there. Sometimes these kobolds helped the miners find veins of valuable ore. Other times, they harmed the miners by collapsing tunnels, causing accidents, or poisoning ores. In fact, the mineral cobalt, which is toxic, gets its name from this. And last but not least, the sea or ship kobolds hid away on ocean vessels, likely because they dwelled within the wood that was used to build the ship. Like the others, they often assisted the human sailors in keeping the ship in good repair, but they wished to remain hidden. It was taboo to see this kind of kobold, and looking at one would cause the peeping sailor to die, or even worse, the whole ship to sink if the kobold was greatly enraged. As I read over bits of lore about the history of the kobold, I'm struck by how it echoes the thoughts and feelings expressed by gamers about the D&D kobold. In mythology, we see these creatures that can be nasty, but they have a certain charm to them, and people want to stay on their good side. There's a real affection for them because of the help they provide. And on the other hand, there's a sense of dread for the problems they can cause if they get offended or angered. It is uncanny how modern gamers, removed by time and space, exhibit the same mindset when it comes to this creature. Are we all subconsciously channeling these same attitudes toward the kobold due to a cultural, mythological evolution deep inside of our minds? Carl Jung would probably argue this is the case, and I myself have been mind-blown time and time again how deeply resonating mythology is, how it expresses something that binds us all through our human dramas and ordeals. So I see the kobold as a metaphor for things like tools and technology, maintenance and invention. Think about how we all have the tasks that we must do in order to keep up our lives. We have household chores, cleaning, fixing, organizing, prioritizing, and on top of all of that, we have our ingenuity. We come up with new solutions or new technology to accomplish things. And all of these behaviors have an origin in nature, in plant, mineral, water. But there are some catches to this, some caveats. For one, you have to keep up with it all. If you let things go, the kobolds get angry. They don't like being neglected or unappreciated. Things start breaking down. Accidents happen. Traps get laid, and then we fall into them. Another catch is that our tools and our technology can be misused. They can kill us. We all know somebody that has got hurt because they weren't paying enough attention while they were working with tools. And we've all felt the temptation to do something malicious or unethical with tools or with technology. We all have a kobold in our mind. In one mode, we are industrious workers. In another mode, we want to joke around, we want to play pranks. And in another, darker mode, we have a capacity for cruelty or selfishness. And if we trespass too far, if we break the time-honored rule and gawk at that kobold who wants to remain unseen, then our house might fall, our mineshaft might collapse, our ship might sink. So when people got upset that I neglected to include the kobold in my dragon video, they weren't just nerding out. And when people speak affectionately about kobolds in D&D, this long-standing figure of the more humble levels of play, we're truly tapping into something ancient. Thus, kobolds, I say unto thee, may the abundance of joyful comments people leave on this video bring you happiness. Now you, my dear viewer and brave companion, please leave a comment for the kobolds to read. Now, what about kobolds' connection to dragons in D&D? Well, let's start heading in that direction. We need to first take a look at how these little creatures began in the game. Originally, the kobolds of D&D were not draconic. They were sort of goblinoids, thus keeping closer to their roots in myth and folklore. They were still small things, typically living underground, and they had an industrious nature. So we see a number of similarities, but also some differences. And as the years and the editions go by, they change even more. So we'll take a look here at this evolution. The society of these creatures is tribal, with war bands based on djinns. The stronger tribes rule weaker ones. Kobolds are usually found in dank, dark places, such as dismal, overgrown forests or subterranean settings. Kobolds hate most other life, delighting in killing and torture. They particularly hate such creatures as brownies, pixies, sprites, and gnomes. They war continually with the latter and will attack them on sight. Kobolds are a cowardly, sadistic race of short humanoids that vigorously contest the human and demi-human races for living space and food. They especially dislike gnomes and attack them on sight. I'm liking them even more. Barely clearing 3 feet in height, kobolds have scaly hides that range from dark, rusty brown to a rusty black. They smell of damp dogs and stagnant water. Their eyes glow like a bright red spark, and they have 2 small horns ranging from tan to white. Because of the kobolds' fondness for wearing raggedy garb of red and orange, their non-prehensile rat-like tails, and their language, which sounds like small dogs yapping, these fell creatures are often not taken seriously. This is often a fatal mistake, for what they lack in sire and strength, they make up for in tenacity. The kobold approach to combat uses overwhelming odds or trickery. They enjoy setting up concealed pits with spikes, crossbows, and other mechanical traps. They usually have viewports and murder holes near these traps, so they can pour flaming oil, missile weapons, or drop poisonous insects on their victims. Kobolds live in dark places, usually underground locations and overgrown forests. They are good miners and often live in the mines they are developing. A kobold tribe sends out war bands that patrol within a 10-mile radius from their lair, attacking any intelligent creatures that enter their territory. Kobolds usually kill prisoners for food, but occasionally they sell some of them as slaves. Their nasty habits and their distrust of most other beings mean that they have many enemies. A kobold lair has one non-combatant child and one egg per 10 adults. The patron deity of the kobolds is Kurtlmak, who despises all living creatures except kobolds. Kobolds revere dragons. They tend to dwell in or around the places where dragons are known to lair. They skulk in the darkness, hiding from stronger foes and swarming to overwhelm weaker ones. Kobolds are cowardly and usually flee once bloodied unless a strong leader is present. Kobolds like to set traps and ambushes. If they can't get their enemies to walk into a trap, they try to sneak up as close as they can and then attack them in a sudden rush. So, many elements of the kobold remain consistent throughout the years. The small statures, the underdog status, the underground layers and the knack for traps, the cruel yet cowardly demeanors. Basically, what has changed is their appearance, as they've become scalier and more reptilian over time, and their ecology, which has developed to include a connection to dragons. Whereas mythologically, they are spirits who coexist with humans, in D&D they are a race of little lawful evil humanoids. 5th edition continues developing in the same direction with the kobolds. Their god, Kurtlmak, is a high-ranking thrall of the evil dragon goddess Tiamat, who is bound within the 9 hells. The gnome god, Garl Glittergold, stole a piece of treasure from Tiamat's hoard, and when Kurtlmak went after him, Garl tricked the kobold god and trapped him in an underground maze forever. This draws the connection between kobolds and dragons, and the bitter hatred between kobolds and gnomes. A further detail here are the Urds, which are winged kobolds. These rare specimens are considered favored by Tiamat, and other kobolds envy them. Well, understandably so. They don't really have any other innate powers or talents that come along with their ability to fly, which honestly I would have liked to have seen, but it does open a new dimension of possibilities with a creature race that is already pretty flexible. Between 5th edition's Monster Manual and Volo's Guide to Monsters, we find 5 different kobold entries, so let's take a look at the attributes and rankings of these. We start with the basic kobold, which represents a typical warrior-type member of a kobold tribe. It's fairly plain, mechanically speaking, with a basic dagger and sling attacks. It has the standard kobold traits of sunlight sensitivity and pack tactics, making it an underground monster that prefers to gang up on foes, just like the lore states. It has a decently cool appearance, with ruddy skin and scales, small horns, and that reptilian look that mixes subtly with some dog-like features. Roleplay-wise, a kobold has a moderate level of interaction built into it. They are cowardly, xenophobic, and hostile, but at the same time, they also are a sentient race. They have intelligence, civilization, and personality. I'm going to give the kobolds an overall moderate rating in lore, as they do have some interesting details and story hooks, but it usually stays kind of vague. I think their lore attribute would be higher if the game designers would have kept them closer to the mythological kobolds, which have more complexity and more hooks to follow. And lastly, they're a pretty versatile creature, with all sorts of goals and tactics and roles in their society. They aren't the most versatile monster out there, but they certainly are more so than a lot of monsters. Kobolds have more variety and flexibility than, say, orcs or ogres or trolls. So, overall, I rank the basic kobold in upper C tier, which is pretty damn good for just a baseline generic member of a race. From here, I say the winged kobold is just slightly better due to its added dimension of flight and all the possibilities that entails. And then we have the Kobold Dragon Shield from Volo's Guide. Again, it's not terribly different than the basic kobold, but it's a bit tougher physically. It has one type of damage resistance, the Heart of the Dragon trait that allows it and its allies to more easily rid themselves of fear or paralysis and gain a morale-boosted attack with advantage. The Dragon Shield is a warrior champion of its tribe, favored by a dragon or maybe even by Tiamat, and it uses a shield made from cast-off dragon scales. You might even find it guarding dragon's eggs. I wanted to rate this guy a bit higher, but its two unique abilities are both very situational, and its lore, while adding a bit to the Kobold's story, isn't really anything too compelling. It just doesn't do much of anything all that different than a regular kobold. So, I gladly place the Dragon Shield at the top of C tier. Then we go into upper B tier, where we find the Kobold Scale Sorcerer. This is essentially a low-level sorcerer NPC, complete with 3 sorcery points and up to 2nd level spells. Its magic is what you'd expect of a kobold, direct blasting with a bit of trickery and expeditious retreat to help it run away. So here we get some different types of mechanical options that are fun. It's also a bit better when it comes to interactions, as scale sorcerers are duty-bound to a dragon. They serve as its emissary and herald. It also has the added pressure of needing to keep its dragon boss pleased, and the threat of draconic death, if it ever angers its master, could lead to some sadistically comical moments with this guy. The final kobold, my personal favorite, ends up in low A tier, the Kobold Inventor. This monster is a toolbox of unique, flavorful, fun options. Just listen to these things it has at its disposal: acid, alchemist fire, basket of centipedes, pot of green slime, pot of rot grubs, scorpion on a stick, skunk in a cage, and wasp nest in a bag. Monsters don't get much more fun than this. The Kobold Inventor embodies all those interesting bits of lore that we've read in the monster manuals over the years about kobolds using murder holes or defensive terrain while they're slinging alchemical goop and poisonous vermin at their adversaries. I just love it when the lore in the writing also exists as interesting abilities in the stat block. I've said it before, and it bears repeating. You know that a monster is really well designed when you read its entry, and immediately your mind is filled with ideas and motivation for an encounter with it. It's nice to have the simple baseline kobold. Those are the average Joes, and a DM needs to have uncomplicated mook creatures to fill out the enemy ranks. But the Kobold Inventor expresses the true soul of kobold kind, a rascally ruffian with an arsenal of bizarre tools. Before I give my conclusion on the kobold, I do want to mention 2 cool things on my Patreon. The first is that I just released my dungeon map, Tomb of the Elven Queen, which I think is my best map up to this point. I'll put links to it at the end of the video and down in the video description below, where you can download it and you can print the free version, or you can sign up and get the full 3-map set. And the second announcement is that I just hit a major goal on my Patreon, and I will now be doing 2 monsters a month, which means twice the amount of patrons will be selected to provide me the concepts and see their ideas brought to life with art, 5e stat blocks, and lore. So now is an even better time to get involved. And as always, if you're not able to sign up just now, don't worry, still go check out my page for the free content. And I've got a newsletter and Discord server links down below too. I have to say that the Kobold well deserved a dedicated video. This is a monster that contains a lot in a small package. It doesn't take much reading about them to realize that they are not merely low-level chump monsters for beginning adventurer parties to take on. The creativity, the depraved inventiveness of the kobolds can make them a force for even mid-level, maybe even high-level characters to contend with. Characters delving into a kobold lair must keep their wits about them and expect an unfair fight. Swords and spells are great, but nothing beats good old adventurer cunning. See if you can do something to gain knowledge about what lies ahead and plan for it. Do you have a stealth character who can spy on the kobolds? Do you have a spellcaster with divination magic who can ascertain helpful information about them? Do you have a character with high social skills? Maybe he can gather information about the kobold's lair, or maybe they can counter the kobolds with his own trickery. Dungeon Masters, don't skimp on the defensive terrain and the engineered hazards when it comes to kobolds. Their strength is not in physical toughness, but in their scoundrel tactics and home defense devices. Your kobold dungeon should feel more like Home Alone than 300. I have to grin just imagining all the diabolic traps and dungeon features kobolds could employ to thwart stronger parties. And if the kobolds exist within immediate service to a dragon, well, that takes things to a whole other level. Who knows? I might just have to make my next dungeon map kobold themed. The inspiration is definitely flowing through me now. Thank you for watching and supporting my channel. Like a thriving kobold tribe, I want to keep expanding, keep building, and keep experimenting with new things. This is Esper. May your household kobolds stay happy and helpful, and may your adventures be many.